You wake up covered in fleas. Your breakfast is gray sludge that's been sitting in the same pot for a week. The toilet is a bucket shared with your entire family. You'll work until your spine cracks. And if you make it to 30, you're considered old. Tonight, we're spending 24 hours as a medieval peasant, and I guarantee you won't make it to sunset. Before we begin, let's get comfortable. Take a moment to adjust your pillow. Settle into a position that feels right. Maybe pull your blanket a little closer. Now take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Hold it for just a moment and release it slowly through your mouth. One more time. Breathe in and out. Feel your shoulders drop, your jaw relax. Let the day fade away. If you'd like, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time is it for you now. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let the sounds of the modern world dissolve. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Back to the year 1325, where survival was the only victory and comfort was a distant dream. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, so are the fleas. Your bed isn't really a bed. It's a pile of straw stuffed into a cloth sack that hasn't been changed in months, maybe years. That straw came from the barn floor, the same floor where chickens walked, pigs rooted around, and your neighbor's goat did things goats do. It was swept up, shoved in a sack, and called a mattress. The smell hits you first, a thick mixture of damp hay, body odor, and something vaguely animal. You share this bed with your entire family, your parents, your siblings, maybe a cousin who showed up last harvest and never left. And if it's cold enough, a goat. Privacy doesn't exist. Personal space doesn't exist. You sleep in a pile, and you've been doing it your whole life. Now let's talk about the residents you can't see. Fleas, lice, bed bugs, mites. They're not visitors. They're permanent tenants, and you're the food supply. You've been scratching in your sleep. Your skin is covered in small red welts. This is normal. Everyone has them. Your mother has them. The priest has them. Even the local lord probably has them, though he'll never admit it. You try to sit up, and your back immediately protests. Straw doesn't provide support. It provides texture. Your spine has been twisted at odd angles all night, and now every vertebra is letting you know about it. You're 22 years old, which in medieval terms makes you middle-aged. Your joints already sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by an angry child. The blanket on top of you is made of wool. One blanket, scratchy, heavy, and unwashed since last winter, maybe the winter before that. It weighs as much as a small dog, not because wool is that heavy, but because it's absorbed months of sweat, dirt, and oils from skin. It's not soft anymore. It's stiff. And it smells like a wet sheep that's been dead for a week. You swing your legs off the pile of straw and prepare to stand. Your bare feet are about to touch the floor, and this is where your morning really begins to deteriorate. The floor isn't wood. It's not tile. It's dirt. Packed earth that gets muddy when it rains, which it did last night. Water leaked through the thatched roof in at least 3 places. So now you're standing in cold, wet mud inside your own home. Your house is one room, just one. No bedroom, no living room, no kitchen. One space where everything happens. Sleeping, cooking, eating, arguing, and occasionally dying. The walls are made of wattle and daub, which is a fancy way of saying sticks covered in mud mixed with straw and animal dung. Yes, dung. It's a natural insulator and adhesive. It's also why your house smells like a barn. There are no windows. Well, there's a hole in the wall covered with an animal hide or oiled cloth if you're lucky. Glass is for rich people, churches, nobility, not for you. So the only light comes from the doorway and the fire pit in the center of the room. The fire that's currently just smoking embers because it's been slowly dying all night. Your eyes adjust to the dim light. You can see your family starting to stir. Your father is coughing, a deep, wet cough that's been getting worse for weeks. Your mother is already up, poking at the fire, trying to coax it back to life. Your younger sister is scratching her head. Lice, again. Or still, it's hard to tell the difference. You take a moment to assess your body and everything hurts. Your shoulders ache from yesterday's work. Your hands are covered in calluses and small cuts that never quite heal. Your feet are rough and cracked. One of your toenails is black. You're not sure why. It's been that way for months, but you're alive. And in the Middle Ages, that's not a small achievement. Half of the children born in your village didn't make it past age 5. You did. That makes you a survivor. Though some mornings, like this one, you're not entirely sure surviving is the victory everyone claims it is. Now comes the part everyone dreads. The morning toilet situation. Nature is calling. And in medieval times, nature doesn't call politely. It screams. And you have exactly 2 terrible options. Option 1, the bucket. It's a wooden bucket sitting in the corner of your one-room house. Everyone can see it. Everyone knows what it's for. And it's already half full because Uncle Godwin ate something questionable yesterday and spent half the night visiting it. The smell. How do you describe something that attacks all your senses at once? It's thick, physical, the kind of smell that makes you breathe through your mouth. But that doesn't help because then you can taste it, a sour, rotten taste that sits on your tongue like a punishment. You approach the bucket with the resignation of someone who's done this 1,000 times because you have every single day of your life. There's no privacy. Your mother is 6 feet away making breakfast. Your sister is getting dressed. The goat is literally staring at you, judging you. You can see it in its weird rectangular pupils. You do what you need to do, quickly, not because you want to, but because the longer you take, the more people will comment. Medieval peasants have opinions about everything, and they're not shy about sharing them, especially when it comes to bathroom habits. But here's the real problem. That bucket can't stay inside forever. Eventually, someone has to empty it. And that someone is probably you because you're young enough to be voluntold into unpleasant tasks. So you pick it up, careful not to slosh, and you walk outside, still half asleep, still barefoot, still trying not to think about what you're carrying, and then you dump it into the street. Not a designated spot, not a sewer system, the street. The same street where people walk, where merchants set up stalls, where children play. You're supposed to shout a warning first. Something like, Gardez l'eau, which is Old French for watch out below. But let's be honest, people don't always shout. And even when they do, nobody moves fast enough. So the streets in medieval towns are less like roads and more like open sewers, human waste, animal droppings, mystery liquids you learn not to look at too closely. If it rains, everything flows. Through the market, past the church, sometimes into the well if you're unlucky, and if you're really unlucky, that's the well you drink from. But we'll get to that nightmare later. Now, option 2, the public latrine. Some towns have them. basically a wooden structure with holes cut into a bench. You sit down next to strangers, shoulder to shoulder, no dividers, no doors, everyone doing their business together like some kind of horrible team-building exercise. The smell is biblical, and the ventilation, a single hole in the roof if you're lucky, sometimes just cracks in the walls. You might make small talk with your neighbor. Nice weather. How's your harvest looking? All while trying not to breathe too deeply. Oh, and toilet paper? Never heard of it. You're using straw, leaves, moss if you can find it, old rags if you planned ahead, sometimes just your hand and hope for the best. This is why handshakes weren't popular in medieval times. This is why people kept their distance, not because of social customs, because of survival instincts. Some wealthy people, and by wealthy I mean minor nobility, might have a garderobe. It's a fancy word for a hole in the wall. You sit on a wooden seat and everything drops straight down, usually into the moat or the street below, or sometimes just the exterior wall where it creates a lovely decorative stain. And here's a fun fact. Enemies sometimes knew about these guardrobes. During sieges, attacking forces would occasionally try to climb up through the waste chutes. Yes, people actually climbed through toilet holes to invade castles. Talk about entering through the back door. So you've survived the morning toilet experience. Your dignity is gone. Your hands are questionable, and your feet are wet with something you're trying not to think about. Now it's time for breakfast. And you're about to discover that food, like everything else in this world, is trying to kill you. You're hungry. You've been hungry since yesterday. And you're about to eat something that looks like it was scraped off the bottom of a boat. Modern breakfast is a choice. Eggs or cereal, toast or oatmeal, coffee or tea. We open refrigerators full of options. We complain if the milk is a day past its expiration date. Medieval peasants didn't have options. They had one meal, the same meal, every single day. It's called pottage. And it's less of a food and more of an ongoing science experiment. Picture a large iron pot. It's been hanging over the fire for days, maybe weeks. You don't start fresh each morning. You just keep adding to what's already there. The base is water, or something that used to be water. By now it's thick, dark. It has the consistency of paste. Then there are the ingredients, whatever was available, whatever didn't rot yet. Grains usually, barley or oats if you're lucky. Turnips, always turnips. Medieval life is approximately 60% turnips. Onions if someone traded for them. Beans if the harvest was good. Maybe some cabbage if you're feeling fancy. And it all goes into the pot. New ingredients on top of old ones. Nothing gets thrown out because you can't afford to waste food. So that turnip from 3 days ago, still in there, somewhere near the bottom. You don't stir it too much, because if you stir it, you might find things you don't want to see. The taste. Imagine if someone boiled dirt, added a pinch of salt if you're lucky, and called it soup. There's no spice. Spices cost more than your house. Pepper is worth more than gold by weight. Literally. Merchants travel thousands of miles and risk their lives for pepper. So you're eating flavorless sludge, and you're grateful for it because at least it's hot, and at least it's food. Now let's talk about the bread. If you have bread, it's not the soft, fluffy bread you're thinking of. This is dense, hard, gritty. It's made from rye or barley flour. But here's the thing. Flour is expensive. So it's been cut with other things, sawdust, ground acorns, sometimes clay, just to make it stretch further. The loaf is so hard you can't bite through it. You have to dip it in the pottage to soften it. And even then, it's like chewing leather. Your jaw gets tired, your teeth hurt, and you're only halfway through your portion. But wait, there's a bonus. If the rye was stored wrong, if it got damp, it might have ergo a fungus. Ergo causes hallucinations, convulsions, sometimes death. It's like medieval Russian roulette, except the gun is bread. You won't know until a few hours after eating whether you got the contaminated batch. Fun times. And to wash it all down, beer. Yes, beer. At 6 a.m, why beer? Because the water will kill you faster than the food will. So everyone drinks weak beer, adults, children, even babies get beer mixed with milk because at least it's been boiled. It's not good beer. It's barely beer. Low alcohol, high survival rate. You're not getting drunk. You're just trying not to die of dysentery. It's made from whatever grains couldn't be used for food, the dregs, the scraps. Fermented until it's technically drinkable. The taste is flat, slightly sour, with a hint of whatever barrel it was stored in. Sometimes wood, sometimes metal, sometimes just dirt if they used a clay pot. But you drink it anyway, because the alternative is the well water. And the well water is where people dump their buckets, remember? So breakfast is over. You've eaten gray sludge, rock-hard bread that might or might not cause hallucinations, and washed it down with medieval beer that tastes like regret. Your stomach is full but not satisfied, and now you have to get dressed. Which brings us to the next layer of suffering. If you think your apartment is drafty because a window doesn't close properly, medieval peasants would like a word. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One, it's a rough wool tunic or linen shift that you've worn every single day for months, possibly years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion. There's just wear this until it disintegrates or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear, optional. If you're lucky, maybe a linen under tunic. If you're not, well, you're going commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had no idea what a proper seam was supposed to look like. There's also no washing machine, no soap worth mentioning, and absolutely no dry cleaner in sight. So your clothes are stained, stiff, and scented like a compost pile that's been left to marinate in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to wash them, it's not easy. You'd have to haul water from a river or well, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic on a board with ashes or lye, and hang it in the sun, which is out approximately 3 days a year, and forget about washing all these layers. Washing your clothes in the middle of winter meant dragging them to a frozen stream, smashing through the ice, and then waiting 2 days for your only shirt to dry. If it didn't just freeze into a tragic shirtsicle. Most peasants wisely decided that smelling like a mix of smoke, sweat, and sheep was a small price to pay for not freezing solid. Interestingly, the dirt and grease buildup had a bonus feature, insulation. That grimy layer locked in body heat. It was like a medieval Gore-Tex jacket, just smellier and far less socially acceptable today. The oils from your skin, combined with months of accumulated grime, actually made the fabric more windproof. So yes, being dirty kept you warmer. Congratulations on your evolutionary adaptation. Boots, shoes, those are luxuries. If you own any, they're made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arch support as a banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot, through mud, through dung, through medieval landmines, aka sharp rocks and disease puddles. Your feet are so calloused, they're practically leather themselves. All this means one thing: your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs live rent-free on your body. Everyone has them. Nobles, lousy monks, itchy children, walking insect farms. No one escapes. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and no one will even bat an eye. Your skin is raw from rubbing, your scalp a battlefield of bites, and if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no one to tell you it's probably scabies. You just keep on suffering. And if you're lucky enough to not get an infection, great. That rash will simply accompany you for the next 6 months like an unwanted medieval sidekick. Now let's talk about your teeth, or what's left of them. Now that you're fully dressed in itches and damp wool, it's time to flash that morning smile. Except you don't, because in the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game. Not emotionally, dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, which is to say some people might chew on a twig, maybe rinse with wine or vinegar. But for the most part, your teeth are on their own, and they're not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant, gums are swollen, and those aren't just food stains on your teeth. That's decay. You have more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar, while not yet everywhere, is becoming more common among the rich. Imported at great cost, mostly used in small cakes or to show off wealth. If you're a noble, congratulations. You get to rot your teeth faster than the peasants. If you're poor, you'll do it slowly over time with fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of hard chewing. Toothaches? Get used to them. They're like medieval weather, always there in the background, the kind of pain that makes you consider praying, drinking heavily, or pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of pliers. And that's not a joke. That was the actual treatment. Dentists didn't really exist, but barber surgeons did. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair is also pulling your molars out by candlelight with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. You'd sit in a chair, maybe have someone hold you down, and the barber would grip the tooth with metal pincers and yank. Sometimes it came out clean, sometimes it shattered, sometimes the jaw broke. Roll the dice. Infected tooth? Hope you like fevers. Because without antibiotics, it can easily turn into sepsis and kill you from a toothache. That's right. The same thing that sends us to a pharmacy today could be your funeral in the 1300s, and there's no relief on the social front either. Kissing? Good luck. Halitosis, bad breath, is everywhere. If you're single, you're not judged by your smile. You're judged by your land and your livestock. In short, your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing the war. Now that your teeth are throbbing, let's head outside, because your real job, the one that will break your back, is just getting started. Time to head to work, except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and no chance of promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work the land that belongs to a lord who probably doesn't remember your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it disappears behind the trees. Your tools, a wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones are still intact in your body. There's no weekend. There's no clocking out. There's only sunrise to sunset. 6 days a week. Sunday is off, but only if you're not harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is brutal. Fields are plowed by hand or with oxen if you're rich enough to afford one. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your spine begins to resemble the letter S. No one cares if you're tired. No one's asking how your mental health is doing. If you're a woman, surprise. You don't just do field work. You also care for children, clean, cook, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice infestation isn't slowly migrating to your side of the bed. Children, they start helping out around age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of one day not dying of the flu. By age 7, they're working alongside adults. By age 10, they're doing a full day's labor. Childhood is a luxury that ended the moment they could walk upright. And if you're one of the few who isn't a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. Great. You still work with fire, chemicals, or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay? Basically survival. The perks? Occasional bleeding, break a bone, too bad. Get a fever, drink some warm beer and keep going. You can't afford to stop, not even for a day. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, medieval Europe has a solution for that. It's called being replaced. So you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test. And the prize for winning is living long enough to do it all again tomorrow. Let's talk about the weather. Because temperature in medieval times isn't about seasons. It's about ongoing punishment from the sky. Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, and no weather app. Just wooden walls with gaps you could throw a chicken through. Your windows, if you can call them that, are covered with cloth, not glass. The fire in the hearth, nice in theory, but you don't have enough firewood to keep it going because wood is expensive and gathering it from the forest is sometimes illegal. Yes, you can be executed for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong forest. You bundle up in your one damp wool tunic, huddle near the dying embers, and still wake up with your nose frozen. Your feet are permanently cold, often damp, your fingers so stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, it's just called bad luck. People lose toes, fingers, sometimes entire hands to the cold, and there's no treatment. You just wrap it in cloth and hope. Now fast forward to summer. Sounds better, right? Wrong. In summer, your home turns into a clay oven. There's no fan, no cross breeze, and absolutely no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but you can't remove them because showing too much skin is scandalous and also invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed body and the smell of last week's goat stew that's still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear while you sleep, assuming you can sleep through the sound of your neighbors yelling and babies crying. In the fields, the sun bakes you. No sunblock, no hat unless you fashioned one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. And the worst part, you still have to work. Heat stroke is just called taking a bad turn. You collapse, someone throws water on you, and you're expected to keep going. So you're either shivering in your hovel wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and your next job is still waiting. Speaking of which, it's time for your midday meal, if you can call it that. Good news, it's time to eat again. Bad news, it's the same pot you ate from this morning. Literally. The pottage pot is eternal. It never ends. It just evolves. By midday, someone's added more water to stretch it further, maybe tossed in some wild greens if anyone had time to forage. The consistency has changed. It's thinner now, more like soup. But the taste? Still bland, still vaguely turnip flavored, still depressing. You eat it standing up in the field or sitting on a rock if you're lucky. There's no lunch break in the modern sense. You get 10 minutes, maybe 15 if the Lord is feeling generous. You shove food into your mouth, chew the bread until your jaw hurts, and then it's back to work. But here's something interesting. Peasants developed some creative ways to make food slightly less miserable. If you were near a forest, you might catch a rabbit, or a bird, or even a hedgehog. Yes, people ate hedgehogs. They were considered decent food if you cooked them right, but there was a massive problem. Hunting. Game animals didn't belong to you. They belonged to the Lord. Deer, wild boar, rabbits, even fish in certain streams. All owned by nobility. Caught poaching? You could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. That's right. Your dinner could get you hanged. So peasants got sneaky. They'd set snares at night, hide kills under bushes, claim they found it dead already. And sometimes, if the Lord was particularly hated, the whole village would conspire to poach together and share the meat in secret. Medieval resistance, one illegal rabbit at a time. Some villages had communal ovens, big brick ovens where everyone baked their bread. You'd bring your dough, wait your turn, and bake. But even this wasn't free. You paid a fee, usually to the Lord who owned the oven, because, of course, he did. Even bread came with a tax. And then there were feast days, holy days when the church mandated rest and celebration. These were the highlights of peasant life. On feast days, someone might slaughter a pig, brew better beer, bake actual decent bread. Everyone would gather, eat until they were uncomfortably full, and for one afternoon, pretend life wasn't a constant grind. But those days were rare, maybe a dozen times a year. The rest of the time, pottage, bread that doubles as a weapon, and beer that tastes like despair. Now let's talk about water, the thing you need to survive, and the thing that's most likely to kill you. Feeling thirsty, need to freshen up, want to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp fever dream of a life? Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It's trying to murder you quietly. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream looks fresh, bubbling and clear like something out of a fantasy movie, but spoiler alert, it's not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it, and if not that, then a dead pig is probably decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe are waiting in every sip. That's why people drank beer, even children. But before you imagine medieval kids doing keg stands, understand that it was small beer, weak in alcohol, strong in survival. Brewing boiled the water, so it was safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. Wine was another option if you were rich enough to afford it and unconcerned with functioning properly before noon. Most peasants never tasted wine unless they stole a sip at church during communion. And even then, it was watered down because priests weren't about to waste good wine on peasants. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning. In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. See, back then, people believed bathing actually opened your pores and let disease in. That's right. Washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were cleaner, apparently, if you never removed the protective layer of filth caked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, mostly in larger towns, but they quickly gained reputations as places for gossip, scandal, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurriculars. Men and women bathing together, drinking, socializing. The church was not amused. So naturally, the church got involved and shut many down. Because if people are having fun, it must be sinful. Even if you did want to bathe, it was a full production. You'd need to fetch water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a wooden tub that leaked, and then pray no one else in the house used it before you, or worse, after. Bathing was a family event. One tub, multiple people, same water. The father went first, then the mother, then the children in order of age. By the time the baby got in, the water was more soup than water, and rainwater, collected in open barrels where birds pooped, insects bred, and moss thrived. Sounds refreshing, doesn't it? Some people tried to filter it through cloth, but that didn't remove much except visible chunks. The microscopic killers were still there, just invisible. So whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or onto your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less of a life source and more of a gamble. One wrong gulp and you're spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach and contemplating all your life choices. Speaking of illness, let's talk about what happens when you get sick. And trust me, you're going to get sick. So you drank the water, or maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages where medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree. Let's start with diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a cough, rash, broken bone, or the creeping plague, is caused by your humors being out of balance. The four humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval science, your health depends on keeping them balanced like some sort of internal soup. Got a fever? Too much blood. The answer? Bloodletting. That's right. Let's drain your life force into a bowl using a dull blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers were often the ones doing it. Imagine getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting. 2 for 1, baby. Feeling sad or anxious? That's clearly an excess of black bile. The cure? Laxatives, maybe a warm herbal purge, or just prayers and a cold compress while everyone avoids eye contact with you and starts carving your coffin. Now, if you break a bone or get a nasty wound, you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia unless you count passing out from pain. Surgery is done with knives that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over fire, not for sterilization, but because they just look scarier that way. Antibiotics, centuries away. Germ theory, not invented yet. They think disease comes from bad air or God being annoyed with your moral failings. Got a stomach ache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Hope you like confessing while vomiting. If your condition gets worse, you'll be treated with more leeches, possibly some crushed beetles, and a priest at your bedside giving last rites, just in case. At this point, they're preparing for the cure known as death. And if by some miracle you recover, everyone just assumes God took pity on you. The doctor takes full credit, and the leech gets promoted. But here's what's truly fascinating. Some medieval remedies actually worked. Not because they understood why, but through trial and error over centuries. Willow bark for pain, which contains a compound similar to aspirin. Honey for wounds, which is a natural antibiotic. moldy bread on infections, which is basically proto-penicillin. They also had some herbs that genuinely helped. Chamomile for digestion, lavender for sleep, mint for nausea. But here's the problem. They used these alongside things that definitely didn't work, like powdered unicorn horn for poison, which was actually narwhal tusk and did nothing, or wearing a dead toad around your neck to cure plague. Spoiler, it didn't. And then there were the charms and prayers, because medicine wasn't just physical like it was spiritual. If you were sick, clearly you'd sinned. So the cure involved confessing, praying, and hoping God noticed you. Some people visited holy relics, a splinter from the true cross, the bone of a saint, even the alleged foreskin of Jesus, which somehow existed in multiple churches simultaneously. You'd pray before the relic, make an offering, and hope for a miracle. Sometimes people felt better, usually because of placebo effect, sometimes because they were going to get better anyway. So yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. And your best bet, don't get sick in the first place, which is nearly impossible when you're living in the conditions we've described. Now, as the sun begins to set, let's talk about what happens when the workday finally ends. And peasants try to find some small joy in this miserable existence. After a long day of labor, lice, and leeches, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling, ready for the one joy left in life. A warm meal, bad news. Your meal is probably trying to kill you. You sit down near the fire to a wooden bowl of, you guessed it, more pottage, the same pot you've been eating from all day, except now it's thicker again because the water's evaporated. And someone added some scraps of salt pork if it's a good day. If not, it's still just turnips and sadness. The bread is there too, still hard, still gritty, still doubles as building material. You dip it, you chew it, you try not to think about the rat that may have nibbled your dinner while you were in the fields. But here's where things get slightly better. Evening is when the village comes alive. After the meal, people gather, not in the house because there's no room, but outside near the well or in front of the church. The men talk about crops, complain about the Lord, and exaggerate their accomplishments. The women gossip, which is the medieval equivalent of news, social media, and entertainment all in one. Gossip in a medieval village was powerful. It could ruin reputations, start feuds, or even get someone accused of witchcraft. If your neighbor's cow died and you'd argued with her last week, well, suddenly you're a witch who cursed the cow. Better hope the priest likes you. Children run around playing games, tag, basically, or throwing stones, or tormenting the village idiot, which was unfortunately considered entertainment, and there were no toys, maybe a stick, maybe a rock shaped vaguely like a horse. Imagination did heavy lifting. And then there was music. If someone in the village had a pipe or a drum, they'd play. Simple melodies, folk songs everyone knew. People would sing along, sometimes dance, which was just stomping in rhythm because formal dance hadn't been invented yet. The church disapproved of dancing naturally. Too much fun. Too much body movement. Clearly sinful. This was also the time for storytelling. Older villagers would tell tales, stories of saints, local legends, or just outright lies about the time they fought off a wolf with their bare hands. No one had books. Literacy was rare. So oral tradition was everything. These stories passed down history, morals, and warnings. Don't go into the forest at night. Don't trust strangers. Don't eat the berries that make you see demons. But let's talk about the real evening activity that everyone looked forward to: drinking. After a day of backbreaking labor, questionable food, and existential dread, medieval peasants had one reliable escape: alcohol. And they embraced it with enthusiasm that would concern modern health officials. We've talked about the weak beer everyone drank for survival, but in the evening, people drank for pleasure, and medieval peasants took their drinking seriously. Taverns or alehouses were the heart of village social life. These weren't fancy establishments, more like someone's house where they brewed extra beer and let people drink it for a small fee. The ale was stronger in the evening, more fermented, higher alcohol content. Peasants would gather, drink, talk, argue, sing, and occasionally fight. The tavern was loud, smoky, and smelled like a combination of beer, sweat, and wet wool. But it was warm, and for a few hours you could forget that your life was miserable. Drinking games existed, believe it or not. Simple ones. Drink until the other guy passes out was popular, or tell a story and take a sip every time you mention the Lord. Get drunk quickly with that one. Women drank too, not as openly in taverns, but at home or in small groups. Brewing was often women's work, so they had access. And honestly, after a day of childcare, cooking, cleaning, and pretending to be happy, they needed it. Now, wine was a different story. Wine was expensive, imported from France or Italy. Only the wealthy could afford it regularly. But on special occasions, feast days, weddings, a village might get some wine. And when they did, people got very drunk very quickly because they weren't used to it. Mead made from honey was another option. Sweeter, stronger, and often used for celebrations, weddings especially. In fact, the term honeymoon comes from the tradition of drinking mead for a month after marriage, though whether that was celebration or coping mechanism is up for debate. Drunkenness wasn't particularly stigmatized. Everyone drank, even priests. In fact, monks were famous for their brewing skills. Monasteries made some of the best beer in Europe. They had time, resources, and a theological justification. God gave us grain, yeast, and water. Clearly, he wants us to make beer. But excessive drinking, falling down drunk, was frowned upon. Not because of health concerns, but because drunk people cause problems. Fights, accidents, saying things they shouldn't. The village didn't have police. So if you got too drunk and started a brawl, the whole community had to deal with it. And hangovers, no Advil, no Gatorade, just regret and more beer. The hair of the dog cure was alive and well in medieval times. Feeling awful from drinking, drink more. Sound logic, some villages had drinking regulations. You couldn't drink during certain religious observances, Lent especially. But people did anyway, and they just hid it better. The church tried to control when, where, and how much people drank, with limited success, because when your life is this hard, you'll find a way to drink. Now let's talk about something the church really didn't approve of: gambling. Medieval peasants loved gambling. Cards didn't exist yet, but dice did. And where there are dice, there's betting. Men would gather in taverns or outside after work, pull out carved bone dice, and gamble away what little they had. The games were simple. Roll high, roll specific numbers, roll anything but what your opponent needs. They'd bet coins if they had them. More often, they'd bet food, tools, or favors. I'll fix your fence if you lose. You plow my field if I win. Sometimes they'd bet their wife's bread, which probably caused domestic disputes later. The church officially banned gambling, called it a sin. Priests preached against it. But enforcement was inconsistent because, guess what? Priests gambled too. Behind closed doors, of course. But they weren't immune to the temptation of dice and beer. Certain holidays were known for gambling. Christmas especially. After feast days, when everyone had eaten, drunk, and lost their inhibitions, the dice came out. Fortunes were won and lost, mostly lost, because dice games favor the house, or in this case, whoever's hosting. There were also betting games involving animals. Cockfighting was popular. 2 roosters in a ring, people betting on which one survives. Brutal, yes, but entertainment options were limited, so sometimes they'd bet on dog fights, or which horse could carry the most weight, or how many rats a terrier could kill in a minute. Medieval entertainment was not for the squeamish. Children gambled too, with stones or sticks, betting chores, or portions of food. If I win, you do my share of weeding, preparing them early for adult vices. But here's what's interesting. Gambling wasn't just about winning, it was about community. Men bonding over shared risk, the thrill of chance in a life where so much was predetermined. You couldn't control if the harvest failed, but you could control your dice throw, or at least pretend you could. Some people got addicted, lost everything, ended up in debt to neighbors or the local lord. Debt in medieval times was serious. You couldn't declare bankruptcy. You either paid, worked it off, or faced consequences ranging from public humiliation to imprisonment, or in extreme cases, sold into indentured servitude. And yet, people kept gambling because the alternative was thinking too hard about their lives. Better to focus on dice than mortality. Now, as the evening darkens and people start heading home, let's talk about something that happened behind closed doors, or more accurately, behind thin walls where everyone could hear everything. Medieval sex and relationships. Let's talk about love and sex in the Middle Ages. And spoiler alert, it's not romantic. It's complicated, messy, and heavily regulated by the church. First, marriage. Marriage wasn't about love. It was a business transaction, a way to merge families, share labor, and produce children. Most peasants married in their late teens or early 20s. The couple often barely knew each other. Courtship wasn't really a thing. More like, you're healthy, you're available, let's do this. Weddings were simple, no elaborate ceremonies, no expensive receptions. You'd stand before a priest, say vows, and that was it. Maybe a small feast afterward, if the families could afford it. Mostly just more beer and the same pottage, but with slightly better bread. Now, sex, the church had opinions, many opinions, but all of them restrictive. Sex was only acceptable within marriage, only for procreation, and only in specific positions. Yes, the church had approved positions. Missionary was the only acceptable one. Everything else was considered sinful. Too much pleasure meant you were doing it wrong. Certain days were off limits. Sundays, holy days, Lent, Advent. Basically, if there was a religious observance happening, no sex, which left maybe half the year technically available. Not that people listened. But officially, those were the rules. Contraception, the church said no. But people tried anyway. Herbal mixtures, timing methods, even just withdrawal. Nothing particularly effective, which is why families were large, not by choice, but by lack of options. Privacy during sex was non-existent. Remember, you live in a one-room house with your entire family. The walls are thin. Everyone can hear everything. This is why people waited until everyone was asleep, or pretended to be asleep, and tried to be quiet. Spoiler, they weren't always quiet. Medieval children knew way more about adult activities than anyone wanted them to. Infidelity happened. More than the church wanted to admit. Men who traveled for work, women left alone for months. Temptation was everywhere. If someone got caught, consequences were severe. Public shaming, fines, sometimes physical punishment. The woman usually got blamed more because, of course, she did. Prostitution existed even in small villages. usually women with no other options, widows, orphans, women cast out by their families. They'd offer services discreetly. The church condemned it, but also recognized it as a necessary evil. Better prostitutes than men bothering respectable women. Medieval logic at its finest. There were also stories of affairs between peasants and nobility, usually the lord taking advantage of peasant women. Prima nocta, the supposed right of the lord to sleep with a bride on her wedding night, probably wasn't as common as movies suggest. But sexual exploitation by those in power absolutely happened. And there was no recourse, no justice system that cared about a peasant woman's complaint against a noble. Same-sex relationships, they happened quietly. The church called it sodomy and condemned it harshly. But in close quarters living, intense same-sex friendships and relationships formed. People just didn't talk about it or used coded language. He's my closest companion. She's my dearest friend. Everyone knew, no one said it outly, and let's not forget, romance did occasionally happen. People fell in love, not always with their spouse, but it happened. Secret meetings, love letters if they could write, small gifts, a flower, a ribbon, a carved piece of wood. Genuine affection existed even in arranged marriages. Sometimes couples grew to care for each other after years together. Sometimes they just tolerated each other until death. But here's the reality. Most peasants were too exhausted for elaborate love lives. After a day of brutal labor, you ate, maybe drank, and collapsed. Sex was functional, quick, and honestly, probably not great for anyone involved. No one was reading romance novels or learning techniques. You figured it out through trial, error, and the occasional overheard conversation. Now, as night fully settles in, there's one more daily ritual we haven't covered: religion. Because in medieval times, God is always watching, and so is the priest. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life, it is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education if you can read, your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as your spiritual landlord. And you're always behind on rent. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The town church bell rings in the morning, noon, and night. Not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Before forget to bow. Sin. Eat meat on Friday. Sin. Think about your neighbor's wife and that one dream. Double sin. And forget about questioning anything. The church says it, you believe it, end of discussion. The Bible is in Latin, a language you don't understand. Only priests, monks, and wealthy educated people can read it, so you rely on the church to interpret everything for you. And if the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough, well, time to kneel harder. Tithes are mandatory. 1/10 of everything you own goes to the church. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have nothing, congratulations, you're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. The church is wealthier than most nobles, and they're not shy about collecting. Sundays are for church. Mandatory attendance. Miss it and face public shame, fines, or worse. The service is long, in Latin, and you don't understand a word. You stand because pews don't exist yet. For hours, your feet hurt, your back aches, but you stay because everyone's watching. And medieval villages are expert level at social pressure. Holidays, they're holy days, dozens of them. And while they offer breaks from labor, they're not for fun. They're for attending Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a dangerous indulgence. Confession is required at least once a year. You enter a small space with the priest and admit everything, every sin, every impure thought, every time you curse the Lord under your breath. The priest then assigns penance, say 50 Hail Marys, donate to the church, or perform some act of service. And he knows all your secrets, which gives him tremendous power in the village. Then there are the saints. So many saints. A saint for every occasion. Sick? Pray to St. Agatha. Lost something? St. Anthony. Toothache? St. Apollonia. There's a patron saint for beekeepers, blacksmiths, and even people afraid of mice. You'd pray, make offerings, and hope the saint was listening. Relics were big business. A bone fragment from a saint, a piece of cloth that touched something holy, even vials of holy blood or virgin's milk. People believed these had miraculous powers. Churches collected them, charged people to view them, and made fortunes. Many were fake, but no one cared. Faith didn't require proof. Superstitions blended with religion seamlessly. You'd make the sign of the cross before entering the forest to ward off evil spirits. Hang holy symbols above your door. Bury a rosary under your threshold. The church officially discouraged pagan superstitions, but people practiced them anyway. Better safe than cursed. And hell. Hell was very real. Vividly, terrifyingly real. Priests described it in glorious detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, eternal wailing. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation definitely will. And the church was happy to remind you constantly that one wrong step lands you there. Questioning the church was dangerous. Heretics were burned, witches were drowned, blasphemers were flogged, and skeptics were quickly reformed. So you went through the motions. You chanted, you bowed, you prayed, and hoped that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might finally land in paradise, assuming the priest liked you. Now finally, as the night deepens and exhaustion takes over, it's time for the last activity of the day, going to sleep and hoping you wake up tomorrow. The day is finally ending. You've worked yourself to the bone, eaten questionable food, scratched insect bites until they bled, and now, mercifully, it's time to sleep. But sleep in medieval times isn't the peaceful escape you're hoping for. You're going back to that straw mattress, the one with the fleas, the one shared with your entire family, and possibly the goat if it's cold enough. Before bed, there's a ritual, not a relaxing one, just practical. You bank the fire, cover the embers with ash so they'll survive until morning, because restarting a fire is hard, and you don't want to deal with that tomorrow. You check the door, not for locks because locks are expensive and rare, but just to make sure it's closed enough to keep out the worst of the cold wind. Then you strip down, not completely because it's freezing, but maybe remove the outer layer. Your tunic stays on. It's practically part of your skin anyway. You crawl onto the straw pile, pull the scratchy wool blanket over yourself, and try to find a position that hurts the least. Your father is already snoring, a deep rattling snore that suggests his lungs are fighting a losing battle. Your mother is muttering prayers, asking God to protect the family, the crops, and please, please make tomorrow less awful than today. Your sister is scratching, always scratching. Lice never sleep. You lie there in the darkness. The fire has dimmed to a faint glow. You can hear the wind outside, the creak of the roof, a rat somewhere in the walls, and you think about tomorrow, which will be exactly like today. Same work, same food, same suffering. But you don't think about it too hard. Because if you do, If you really consider the endless cycle of labor and misery, you might lose hope. And hope is the only thing keeping you alive. Hope that next harvest will be better. Hope that you'll survive another winter. Hope that maybe, just maybe, your children will have it slightly easier than you did. Spoiler, they won't. As you drift off, your body aching, your stomach half full, your mind exhausted, you enter a fitful sleep. You'll wake up multiple times during the night because something bit you, because you're cold, because your back hurts, because someone in your family is coughing loud enough to wake the dead. And when morning comes, you'll do it all again. Because that's life as a medieval peasant, a cycle of survival with no escape, no upward mobility, no retirement plan, no hope of things getting significantly better. This is what a day in medieval times really looked like. Not the castles and chivalry of fairy tales, but the brutal, unglamorous reality of how most people actually lived. If you were dropped into this world right now, you wouldn't make it a week. The food would sicken you, the work would break you, and the complete lack of modern conveniences would drive you insane. And yet, people survived this, millions of them for centuries. They worked, they loved, they had children. They found small moments of joy in beer and gossip and saints' feast days. They were tougher than we can imagine, not by choice, but by necessity. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your comfortable bed, with your climate control and indoor plumbing and freedom from parasites, maybe take a moment to appreciate it, because not so long ago in the grand scheme of history, this level of comfort was unimaginable. It was a fantasy that peasants couldn't even dream of because they had no reference point. You wouldn't last a day as a medieval peasant, but thankfully you don't have to. You made it to the present, where life is still hard, but at least your bed doesn't have fleas, usually. Let's talk about something that makes the rest of medieval life look almost pleasant. Domestic violence. And the truly horrifying part, it was completely normalized, expected even. In medieval society, a husband had legal authority over his wife, not just social authority, legal. She was property. He could discipline her however he saw fit. The church actually encouraged it. Spare the rod, spoil the wife. Yes, that was real advice from religious authorities. Beating your wife wasn't considered abuse. It was considered household management. As long as you didn't kill her or cause permanent disfigurement, you were within your rights. Even permanent injury was often overlooked if the woman deserved it. And what constituted deserving? Talking back, burning dinner, not producing sons, being seen speaking to another man. The bar was low. The rule of thumb supposedly comes from this era. The idea that a man could beat his wife with a stick as long as it wasn't thicker than his thumb. Historians debate whether this was an actual law or just a saying, but either way it reflects the casual acceptance of domestic violence. Women had almost no recourse. They couldn't divorce. The church didn't allow it except in extreme circumstances. And even then, a divorced woman was socially ruined. She couldn't own property, couldn't work most jobs, couldn't remarry. She'd end up destitute or forced into prostitution. So many women just endured. Some women fought back quietly. Poison was called the woman's weapon for a reason. A bit of something toxic in the stew, an overdose of herbs in the beer, and suddenly the abusive husband develops a mysterious illness. No one asks too many questions because everyone suspects, but without proof, the wife faces no consequences. But fighting back was dangerous. If caught, the punishment was severe. Public whipping, being locked in stocks, or even execution. The village would turn against her. She murdered her husband. Never mind what he did to her for years. Her crime was considered worse. Children witnessed all of this. They grew up watching their father beat their mother. Normalized it. Boys learned this was how you control a wife. Girls learned this was what marriage meant. The cycle continued generation after generation. And it wasn't just wives. Servants, apprentices, even adult children living at home could be beaten by the head of household. Violence was the primary method of maintaining order. No timeouts, no grounding, just physical punishment. Swift and painful. The community rarely intervened. Not our business. Every man's home is his castle. They'd only step in if it got so bad it disrupted the village. Like if the screaming kept everyone awake at night, then they'd tell the man to quiet down, not to stop. Some villages had scold's bridles, metal contraptions strapped to a woman's head with a piece that went in her mouth, used to punish women who talked too much, argued with their husbands, or spread gossips, or she'd wear it in public as humiliation. The pain and degradation were the point. This isn't rare or unusual. It's standard. Historians estimate that domestic violence occurred in the majority of medieval households. It was so common it barely warranted mention in records unless it ended in death. So when we romanticize medieval times, when we imagine knights and ladies, remember that behind closed doors, or rather behind thin walls, everyone could hear through, violence was a daily reality for countless women and children, and no one cared enough to stop it. Medieval people loved a good execution. And by loved, I mean they treated it like a festival. Public punishment wasn't just about justice. It was entertainment. A break from the monotony of peasant life, and everyone attended. Executions were announced days in advance. The whole village would show up, bring the kids, pack some food, make a day of it. Vendors would set up stalls, selling meat pies and beer near the gallows. Yes, execution day was a market day. The most common method was hanging. Quick if you were lucky, the prisoner would drop, the rope would snap their neck, instant death. But if the executioner miscalculated the drop length, or the rope was too long, or the knot tied wrong, you'd strangle slowly, kicking and thrashing while the crowd watched. Some people placed bets on how long you'd last. For more serious crimes, treason, heresy, murder, the punishments got creative. Burning at the stake for witches and heretics. They'd tie you to a post, pile wood around you, light it up. If you were lucky, the smoke suffocated you before the flames reached you. If not, you burned alive while screaming. The crowd watched silently, mostly. Some cheered, drawing and quartering for traitors. This was the worst. You'd be hanged until almost dead, cut down, disemboweled while still alive, then hacked into 4 pieces. Your body parts displayed in different towns as a warning. The crowd watched the whole thing, described it to their friends later over beer, the breaking wheel for particularly hated criminals. You'd be tied to a large wooden wheel, and the executioner would use an iron bar to break your bones one by one, arms, legs, ribs, spine. Then the wheel would be raised on a pole, and you'd be left there, broken and dying for days sometimes. Birds would start pecking at you before you were even dead. But not all public punishments were fatal. Some were designed for humiliation, the stocks, wooden frames that locked your head and hands in place. You'd sit in the town square while people threw rotten vegetables, dung, dead animals, whatever they could find. For hours, sometimes days, no bathroom breaks. You'd sit in your own filth. While children mocked you and adults discussed your crimes, the pillory was similar but upright, your head and hands locked in a frame while standing. Same abuse from the crowd. But worse because sometimes they'd throw stones, aim for the face, accidentally blind you. No one was held accountable. Scold's bridles for women who talk too much. Branding for thieves. A hot iron pressed into your cheek, marking you forever as a criminal. Ear cropping for repeat offenders. Whipping posts where you'd be tied and flogged publicly. The number of lashes depending on your crime. And the crowd was an active participant, not just watching. They jeered, threw things, shouted suggestions to the executioner, make it last longer, aim for the face. It was a collective experience, binding the community through shared witnessing of violence. Children brought to executions weren't sheltered. Parents wanted them to see, to learn. This is what happens when you steal. This is God's justice. 5-year-olds watching people burn alive, learning that this is normal, this is how society works. The bodies weren't always buried properly afterward, sometimes left on display, hanging in cages called gibbets until they rotted and fell apart. A constant reminder in the town square. Walking past a decomposing corpse on your way to market. Just another Tuesday. And here's what's truly disturbing. People enjoyed it. It wasn't reluctant attendance. They genuinely found it entertaining. The spectacle, the drama, the communal experience. It broke up the routine, gave them something to talk about for weeks. Remember when they burned that witch? Did you see how long he lasted on the wheel? So when you think medieval times were simpler, more wholesome, remember that public torture and execution were family entertainment, and everyone from the priest to the children watched with interest. Medieval peasants were afraid of everything. Evil spirits, curses, witches, demons, the evil eye, fairies who stole babies, and angry gods who sent storms. They lived in a world where any misfortune could be supernatural, and when something bad happened, someone had to be blamed. Let's start with everyday superstitions. Never walk under a ladder. Evil spirits gather there. Don't spill salt. That's wasteful and invites bad luck. If a black cat crosses your path, turn around and go home. Clearly a witch is familiar scouting for victims. Knock on wood to ward off evil. Hang garlic above your door. Bury a horseshoe under the threshold. Toss salt over your left shoulder if you spill it. These weren't quaint traditions. They were serious protective measures against very real threats in their minds. Animals acted strange, witchcraft, crop failure, someone cursed the field, baby born with a defect, mother saw a demon during pregnancy. Every bad thing had a supernatural explanation and someone to blame. Witch hunts began as early as the 1300s, though they peaked later. But the seeds were planted in medieval paranoia. An old woman living alone, a widow with herbal knowledge, a midwife whose mother died during childbirth. Any woman who was different, outspoken, or just unlucky became suspect. The accusations were wild, flying on broomsticks, consorting with demons, cursing neighbors, souring milk, causing impotence, killing livestock with a glance. No evidence needed, just suspicion and fear. Once accused, you were guilty until proven innocent, and proving innocence was nearly impossible. Trial by water was common. They'd tie you up and throw you in a river. If you floated, you were a witch because water rejected evil. They'd pull you out and burn you. If you sank and drowned, congratulations, you were innocent. You're dead, but vindicated. Trial by ordeal included carrying hot iron. Your hand would be wrapped for 3 days. If it healed without infection, you were innocent. If it got infected, which it almost always did, because medieval hygiene, you were guilty. Either way, your hand was ruined. Confession was extracted through torture, sleep deprivation, starvation, beatings. Eventually, you'd confess to anything just to make it stop. Yes, I'm a witch. Yes, I flew to the devil's Sabbath. Yes, I cursed your cow. Anything to end the pain. And here's the worst part. Your neighbors participated. the people you'd known your whole life, they testified against you. I saw her whispering to her cat. She looked at me funny, and then I got sick. She knew things she shouldn't know. Fear made people cruel. Women were the primary targets, but men could be accused too, especially if they were too smart, too rich, or too annoying. The local healer who knew herbs, witch, the old hermit in the woods, demon worshiper, the beggar who cursed you when you didn't give alms, definitely evil. The church both encouraged and discouraged witch hunts. Officially, they said most accusations were superstition, but they also preached about the reality of demons and Satan's influence. Mixed messages that fueled paranoia. Some accusations were just feuds dressed up as justice. You hated your neighbor, accuse her of witchcraft. She took your land in a dispute. Witch. Her son married the girl you wanted, clearly consorting with demons. It was weaponized suspicion. And once the hysteria started, it spread, village to village. One accusation led to another. Under torture, accused witches would name accomplices, usually other people they didn't like or wanted revenge against. The cycle continued. People genuinely believed. This wasn't cynical manipulation. They truly thought witches were real. Demons walked the earth, and evil magic threatened their lives. That fear shaped everything. How they lived, who they trusted, what they would do to protect themselves. So medieval peasants weren't just fighting physical hardships. They were battling imaginary threats that felt just as real. And those imaginary threats often resulted in very real violence against innocent people. We've talked about medieval medicine being basically torture, but we haven't covered the truly strange remedies people actually tried and believed worked because desperate times call for desperate measures. And urine. Let's start there. Urine. Medieval doctors used it for everything. Drink it to cure jaundice. Wash wounds with it for infection, mix it with herbs for skin conditions. They even diagnosed illness by examining urine, color, smell, and taste. Yes, taste. Doctors would taste your pee to figure out what was wrong with you. Sweet urine, probably diabetes, though they called it something else, for headaches. Drill a hole in your skull. Trepanation was a real procedure. The idea was to release evil spirits or bad humors causing the pain. Surprisingly, some people survive this. Archaeological evidence shows skulls with holes that healed, meaning they lived afterward. Though whether the headache improved is unknown. Can't get pregnant? Clearly your womb is wandering around your body. Yes, they believed the uterus could move. So the cure was to attract it back to the right position, using pleasant smells near your vagina and bad smells near your face. Fumigation with herbs and incense down there, rotten cheese near your nose, to guide the womb home. Toothache? Tie a string around the bad tooth, tie the other end to a door, slam the door. Tooth ripped out, problem solved, except for the bleeding, infection, and trauma. But the tooth is gone, so success, baldness, rub bear fat on your scalp, or chicken droppings, or a mixture of ashes and honey. None of these work, obviously, but people tried them anyway. Hope is powerful. Impotence, eat animal testicles. Bull, rooster, ram. The logic being like cures, like you want virility, eat virile parts. This actually persisted for centuries and still shows up in some traditional medicines. Still doesn't work. Plague cure, there were many, all useless. Carry a live chicken and hold it against the plague sores. The idea was the chicken would absorb the disease, the chicken dies, you live. Spoiler, you both die. Drink mercury, because clearly poison will cure illness. bleed the patient, because losing blood when you're already dying always helps. For wounds, apply a poultice made of bread, milk, and cobwebs. The cobwebs actually might help because they have some mild antibacterial properties, but mostly you're just putting moldy bread on an open wound. Roll those dice. Stomach ache, swallow a live spider wrapped in butter. The spider fights the pain from inside. What actually happened was you ingested a spider, felt terrible, and the stomach ache was now the least of your problems. Depression or melancholy, bloodletting, of course, but also expose yourself to strong smells, wear amulets, listen to music, take long walks. Some of this actually might have helped. Accidentally stumbling onto actual mental health treatments while thinking you were rebalancing humors. For epilepsy or falling sickness, drink a mixture that includes powdered skull, preferably from someone who died violently. The logic was their violent death left strong spiritual energy that could combat the seizure demons. This did nothing except make you a cannibal. Eye problems, stare at something gold. Gold was considered pure and healing. Or rub spit in your eyes. Jesus did it in the Bible, so it must work. It didn't. You just got spit in your eye. Warts, rub them with a piece of stolen meat, then bury the meat under a full moon. As the meat rots, the warts will disappear. What actually happened was sometimes warts go away on their own, and when they did, after the ritual, people thought it worked. Insomnia, sleep with a piece of amber under your pillow, or drink lettuce water, or have someone recite prayers over you while you lie down. The prayers might have worked as a meditative focus, accidentally functional. And then there were charms and prayers. For every ailment, there was a saint to pray to or a charm to wear, a rabbit's foot for luck, a toad carried in a bag around your neck to cure plague, a written prayer rolled up and swallowed to cure fever. The fascinating thing is, some remedies worked. Not for the reasons they thought, but they worked. Honey on wounds actually is antibacterial. Moldy bread contained primitive penicillin. Willow bark for pain relief actually does contain salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. So medieval medicine was a chaotic mix of accidentally effective remedies, placebo effects, and outright harmful nonsense. And people had no way to tell which was which. So they tried everything and hoped for the best, because hope was the real medicine. Even if the treatment was drinking your own urine, at least you were doing something, anything, in a world where illness was a death sentence more often than not. So we've walked through an entire day and night as a medieval peasant, from the flea-infested wake-up to the paranoia-soaked sleep, from the gray sludge breakfast to the beer-soaked evening, from the brutal labor to the forbidden pleasures, from the normalized violence to the strange cures. And if you're honest with yourself, you wouldn't last not a week, probably not even a full day. The food would make you sick. The water would give you dysentery. The work would break your back. The lack of hygiene would drive you insane. And the complete absence of modern medicine would mean any minor injury could turn into a life-threatening infection. You think you could handle it, but you couldn't. None of us could. We're soft. We're spoiled. And that's okay. That's progress. That's civilization advancing. We don't need to survive like that anymore because we built a world where we don't have to. Medieval peasants were tougher than we can imagine, not by choice, but by necessity. They endured conditions that would break us in hours, and they did it every single day for their entire lives, lives that were short, brutal, and filled with suffering we can barely comprehend. They worked fields that would kill modern farmers, ate food that would hospitalize us, drank water that was actively poisonous, lived through winters that would freeze us solid, survived illnesses we've eradicated, and found small moments of joy in beer, gossip, and occasional feast days. And somehow, through all of this, they built families, formed communities, believed in something beyond the suffering, and pushed humanity forward inch by bloody inch. They are the reason we're here. Their stubbornness, their resilience, their refusal to just lie down and die. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your comfortable bed, with your climate control and indoor plumbing and freedom from parasites, with your full stomach and clean water and medicine that actually works, take a moment to appreciate it, because not so long ago, just 700 years, a mere blip in human history, this level of comfort was unimaginable. It was a fantasy that peasants couldn't even dream of because they had no reference point. They had no concept that life could be anything other than hard. You wouldn't last a day as a medieval peasant. But thankfully, you don't have to. You made it to the present, where life is still hard, yes, but at least your bed doesn't have fleas, your water won't kill you, and if you get sick, there's a decent chance you'll survive. Sleep well, and be grateful. Very, very grateful.